I love to preach. And the truth of the matter is, not only do I love to preach, but I love also to talk about preaching. You guys know that Dr. Steve Brown is one of my favorite preachers, and he's become a dear friend over the years. Anyway, not long ago, I heard Dr. Brown preach, and he was telling the story of another great preacher, a man by the name of Jonathan Edwards. Many of you perhaps know him from history. Edwards was kicked out of his church, and he refused to respond to or say anything about those who were responsible for causing him to lose his pastorate. He made it clear that he wanted God to take care of it. So Jonathan Edwards remained silent about the whole thing. He didn't talk about all the grief and the pain that he had felt. He didn't talk about losing his pulpit at all. As Dr. Brown then said, within a year or two, the two men, the main men responsible for Jonathan Edwards' removal, did not fare so well. One committed suicide, and the other went insane. And then Dr. Brown finished the sermon by saying, when I was a pastor, I would tell that story at least once a year, and then I would pause, look around, and quip, I'm just saying. G. Campbell Morgan was a great preacher of a previous era. In fact, all four of his sons went into the ministry. A Presbyterian deacon once asked G. Campbell Morgan's grandson if he intended to become a preacher like his grandfather, like his father, and like his uncles. No, sir, the young man said. I'm going to work. Well, this morning, because of what we have to deal with and the length of the text and the intricacies of it, it may feel like work, and it might be work. In fact, as much as I love studying it and preaching it, it really is work. And the truth is, I know that listening and applying all this is work for you too. This morning, we have yet another twist in the story from 1 Samuel that demands from us what the biblical text always does. It demands to be studied, and it demands to be preached, and it demands to be heard, and it demands to be applied. So that's what we're going to do. We're in 1 Samuel. We've learned so far about Elkanah and Hannah and Peninnah and Eli and Hophni and Phinehas and Samuel, and a lot has happened in the story. Throughout the book, we see the reality of God's rule and God's reign. In other words, God's sovereignty. Thus, the title of the series that we continue this morning, Snapshots of Sovereignty, 1 Samuel chapter 6. I'll invite you to turn there and stand, please, for the reading of God's Word. 1 Samuel chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months, and the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us with what we shall send it to its place." They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you." And they said, "What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him?" They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you and your gods and your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had dealt severely with them, did they not send the people away, and they departed? Now then, take and prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its side the figures of gold, which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way, and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence. Thank you so very much. You may be seated. Well, believe it or not, we're going to get through the entirety of the chapter this morning, but we'll read that momentarily. Just four main thoughts this morning, and there's a lot to deal with today. First of all, everybody determines what to do with God. Everybody determines what to do with God. We get this from the first 9 verses that we read just a moment ago. This is now the third episode in the story of the ark, and while there are a lot of things that I trust we will see, foremost among what we recognize should be the power of God. Don't miss that. It's a bit troublesome whenever I talk to believers about the Bible and some particular books in the Bible, and they say, well, this is a book about Samuel, or they might say this is a book about Esther, or this is a book about the Apostle Paul, and that's true, and I get that, but please make no mistake, in the ultimate sense, don't miss the truth that the Bible is a book about God. The Bible is a book about God. Now, in my home church, they would say amen. Thank you for that, because this is my home church now. So what's happening, and what do we ultimately see? The ark has been among the Philistines 7 months at this point, and you may recall from last time we were together, things have not been going all that well. Because of the ark's presence, the Philistines had been struck with tumors. Remember, there's a whole story there. Ask your neighbor. Remember, their pagan god, Dagon, had his hands cut off. But the hand of God has been heavy upon the people, as the text reminds us. Notice verse 2 says, and the Philistines called for. This is very likely an indication that the rulers, these lords of the people, these leaders of the people, as we talked about last time, are giving in to pressure from the people. The Philistines called for. It's the people and not just the leadership at this point that are calling for a change in the agenda. Getting to the point of returning the ark demonstrates the knowledge that they've offended the God of the ark. So they consult with the priests, they consult with the diviners. The priests were in charge of the worship of the Philistine gods, and the diviners among the people obtained information about the future by seeking to understand and interpret omens and various signs of the times. This was the equivalent of the Ouija board crowd or the tarot card readers of our day. And make no mistake, Deuteronomy 18 makes it clear this practice was forbidden in Israel. It's interesting, too, that this is the first time they refer to the ark as the ark of God. They recognize this. And now they're asking, what should we do? What do we do with this ark of God? What should they do with the ark? And what should they, in fact, send along with it? And notice verse 3, where they say, if you send the ark, the priests encourage that a guilt offering be sent along. This would be reparation for what they've done and perhaps will appease the God of Israel. If the tumors go away, they'll be sure about what caused the tumors in the first place. So they ask what the guilt offering should be. The answer comes back, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, replicas of all of these things. These images must be made of gold to both honor as well as appease God. 5 represents, in all likelihood, the 5 lords of the Philistines, as well as the 5 cities that they represent. Verse 5 makes it clear that these mice have ravaged the land. Interesting, isn't it, that the grain is being destroyed by the mice under the nose of the pagan deity Dagon, who is the supposed god of grain and vegetation. Again, this is about as close as God will get to rubbing their noses in all the mistakes they're making. They've delayed 7 months already, and the priests and the diviners exhort the Philistines not to harden their heart like the Pharaoh and the Egyptians did. In other words, they're saying, don't be so stubborn. You know what happened. Don't refuse to comply with what should be done here, lest you end up with 10 plagues like the Egyptians did and like Pharaoh did. The Philistines and the Philistine lords, the leaders, are determining what to do with God. How to communicate with God, what to say, what to send, what to do. To the point, let me ask you, what should you do with God? Well, you should do the right thing. You should follow through with his instructions. You should abide by his rules. You should submit to his authority. I know those are two bad words in our culture, submit and authority, but we should submit to the authority of God. Everybody determines what to do with God. The Pharaoh made a decision, the Egyptians decided, the Philistines did too, and so have you, and so have I. The question is, have we done the right thing? I think it's likely that the diviners who then encouraged the sort of test accompanied with the return of the ark, a new cart, 2 milk cows and their calves, will determine if this whole thing is of God or not. The cows are those who have never previously been yoked to a cart before. The big deal about all this is these are animals that are going to be basically charged with doing something they've never been trained to do. So you know how easy all of this would be, right? So thus, in this sort of game the people are playing, if the cows go straight to Beth Shemesh, then God's the one to blame for the calamity of the tumors. If not, then they think, obviously, this is all just coincidence. At this point, don't you want to pause and kind of interrupt the story and shake them and say, what is wrong with you people? Aren't you smart enough to read the signs of the time? Don't you have enough common sense to know what it is that's really happening here? And then I think of our world. And I think of my world. And the answer for them was no. And the answer today would sadly be the same. The ark is to be sent without a guide. The animals are left to follow their instincts. In fact, it's safe to say only the guidance from God himself would compel these animals to pull the cart and move away from their young. That's not the way that would typically have worked. And that's exactly what happened. The diviners came up with a scenario weighted against recognizing God, and yet the whole thing causes all of them to recognize God. That doesn't mean they're going to respond appropriately, however, but not surprisingly, God came through as he always does. Listen, just like God used a donkey to speak, he can certainly use cows to deliver the ark. Throughout this whole experience, God was speaking to the people. Make no mistake, he was pointing them in the right direction. He was punishing them for their disrespect of him and his ways. He was making it clear who was large and in charge. And it wasn't them. Make no mistake, just as he always does, God was speaking through circumstances. The Philistines, the lords and leaders of the Philistine cities, the priests and the diviners, all of them had to determine what to do. They had to determine what to do with the ark, the object that represented the very presence of God. We all have to do the same. We all determine what to do with God. Follow him, obey him, ignore him. What are you doing? I'm asking you really. What are you doing with God? There are countless decisions a lot of people make every day that I don't have to. Why is that the case? And this is the case for many, if not most of you, maybe all of us. This is the case because of what I've done with God. What I mean is because the one decision I made to obey Christ, to obey God a long time ago, literally that made countless other decisions for me in that one moment. I don't have to decide to believe the Bible. I don't have to decide to love others. I don't have to decide even to love my enemies. I don't have to decide to be faithful to my wife. I don't have to decide to stay sober. I don't have to decide to protect life. I don't have to decide to hate the evil deeds of darkness. Why? Because as a little boy, I decided to surrender to Jesus And all of those other decisions were made for me. So everybody determines what to do with God. Secondly, not only everybody determines what to do with God, but I want you to recognize often God demonstrates He's in control. Often God demonstrates He's in control. Look with me now, please, at verse 10 and following in the text. The men did so and took 2 milk cows and yoked them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. And they put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the golden mice and the images of their tumors. And the cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And when they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. Often God demonstrates He's in control. So the cows are hooked up to the cart, their calves are shut up at home, the ark of the Lord is on the cart, and off they go. And listen, I know this is an experience none of us have ever had. It's weird for us to talk about this. Here it is. Let's learn from it. The text demonstrates there's no doubt as to where they're going. They are going straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh. They turn neither to the right nor to the left. They're going straight. No human hand guides them. What they're doing is nothing short of demonstrating God's power and God's control. Once again, God demonstrates He's in control. He was in control when He spoke the universe into being. He was in control when the rains came 40 days and 40 nights and the earth was flooded. He was in control when He caused the waters to recede. He was in control when the Red Sea parted and the children of Israel escaped the Egyptians. He was in control. Can you think about a situation in your life where you have seen the hand of God at work? That's His control. That's His control. That's His working. That's His sovereignty. And listen, even if at times you may not think or feel things have gone the way they should have, even then, God has been in control. Right? The lords of the Philistines are tagging along behind just to see what's going to happen. And they see with their very own eyes that which occurs, the reality that God is in control. We get to verse 13, and the people of Beth Shemesh are present to receive the ark. And this looks like a great scene, right? They're in the middle of reaping their wheat harvest, and they rejoiced to see the ark. But here's what we don't know. Were their hearts really right with God? Were they rejoicing in Him? Or were they, as John McCain notes, simply welcoming back to its rightful place a piece of their national heritage? Like, were they worshiping God because the representation of the presence of God was back among them? Or were they looking around and this is a national treasure and it's come back home and they're excited about that? It's a given at times. The people were more enamored with things related to their national heritage than they were enamored with the things of the Lord. It's a given at times. The people were more enamored with things related to their national heritage than they were enamored with the things of the Lord. Thankfully, that's the last time that's ever happened. Everybody determines what to do with God. Often God demonstrates He's in control. Thirdly, determining our dealings with God is important. Determining our dealings with God is important. Verse 14 and following in the text. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord, one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, one for Ekron. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. And he struck some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. Then the men of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us?" Determining our dealings with God is important. Now, this Joshua is not the Joshua we know of as the protege of Moses. We don't really know much, if anything, about this particular Joshua. The cart with the ark and the gold tumors and the gold mice stops at a great stone in his field, and therefore he's mentioned. The Levites then take down the ark and the box beside it, and they put them on this great stone, and then and there the men offered sacrifices. We read this and we think, well, that sounds familiar. This has to be good, right? And while it may be, we also see that when we get to verses 19 and 20, that something is terribly amiss. Something's wrong. To the point, how are we to properly interact with God? Our communication, determining our dealings is important, very important. Now, for those of you who track such things, there is a translation issue related to verse 19. Suffice it to say, it's safe to say that one of the main issues about which we should be concerned is simply this, answering the question, what did they do wrong? They looked upon the ark and they died. What did they do wrong? Some of these look upon the ark of the Lord and they are struck down, as the Bible records. We hear that and we say, well, what's the problem? According to some scholars, the idea of the phrase looked upon or look upon conveys an unholy interest in the ark. Something like they didn't treat the ark with the respect that it deserved, and essentially they saw the ark as more of kind of a tourist attraction. Now, before you say, that doesn't make any sense, let me ask you, have you ever been to or ever studied some of the great cathedrals of the world? There are people who treat them the very same way. They treat those buildings built for the glory of God not as places for worship, but rather as kind of tourist attractions. They're not sad that no one is coming to Christ through the ministry of those churches anymore. They're not sad because the gospel is not being proclaimed from those beautifully ornate pulpits anymore. They're not sad because the beautiful edifice in which they find themselves is no longer a bastion of righteousness. They're content because they get to sit for a few moments in an architectural marvel. I could take you, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, I could take you to countless church buildings that now simply serve as tourist attractions. They're beautiful, but they've been emptied of the power of God. And they dot the landscape all over the world. Some people treat their Bible the same way, like it's a relic, or a relic to be protected rather than a book to be read. Listen, I guess I'm glad he did it, but I didn't need Kid Rock to remind me to keep dust from getting on my Bible. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you know that to be true. Why was God so angry at these men? We don't know for certain, but it's safe to say two things. Number one, they knew how they should have responded. They knew what to do. Number two, God was obviously not pleased with their response. Dr. Charles Stanley said it this way: in every relationship, we should maintain a reverence for what God holds sacred. When we treat His presence lightly, we risk invoking His discipline. He longs for us to draw close, but we must approach with caution and respect. To the point, sometimes people don't seem to take seriously the fact that it's up to God how He wants to be treated, how He desires for things to be done, and we should act recognizing that we're living in His presence. People say, for example, how come somebody has to believe in Jesus in order to be saved? Couldn't there be another way? Well, here's what I know. That's the way God said that we're made right with Him. So my best response is to go along. Agreed? What about baptism? I don't know why that has to be such a big deal that people go in the water and they're immersed like that. That's the way God said it was to be done. You got a better idea? So how is this sinful mindset of ancient Israel worked out in modern day people? What's a corollary? I think the mindset of ancient Israelites, it's akin to those who say things like, I know the Bible says marriage is for a man and a woman, but we have to get with the times. I'd be ready to get struck if one says that. Why? Because God makes the rules. God makes the rules, not the Supreme Court of the United States. Those who say Jesus works for me, but man, we can't expect that Jesus is really the only way to be saved. I'd be ready to get struck if one says that. God said this is how we're to be forgiven. Listen, these men just looked upon the ark of the Lord. Somehow they did that the wrong way and they died. That's a pretty big deal, don't you think? It's God's prerogative how He wants things to go, and I suspect He's not going to check in with you or me or anybody else to get our permission. Amen. Right? You know, part of the problem is that people treat the things of God, and dare I say it, even the church, like it's a business. The church is a company, and the people are the consumers. If the church does something that's not pleasing to them, they act like a customer, as if the church of Jesus Christ is some kind of store or business or something. Not here. Everybody hear me? Not here. Everybody say not here. Not here. But in some places, pastors and ministry leaders are treated like hirelings. You know how it goes, the old saying when people say, you'll do it my way because I pay your salary. We're not corporate America. The church is not corporate America. This enterprise dates back to an even earlier time. In fact, we go back some 2,000 years, and the S&P 500 index is really not the big deal around here, but rather the Bible is. Can I get a witness? So we don't change the Bible. The Bible, through the working of the Holy Spirit, changes us. God will always have the last word. God sets the terms. Always has, always will. And if you don't believe that, then ask the men who looked upon the ark of the Lord the wrong way. So everybody determines what to do with God. Often God demonstrates He's in control. Determining our dealings with God is important. Fourthly and finally, abdication of spiritual dedication is always a temptation. Abdication of spiritual dedication is always a temptation. The last verse of the chapter, verse 21. So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you. The previous section makes it very clear that the men of Beth Shemesh were wondering about these two important questions. Who is able to stand before the Lord? And the second question is really telling. Essentially, it indicates that they view the ark's presence as a problem to be solved, not a sin from which to repent, but just a problem to be solved. And that's where we find the people in verse 21. And I'm afraid that's where we find a lot of people in 2026 as well. just as the people wanted to pawn off the ark of God, in some ways, Christians today, many Christians today, want to pawn off our heritage too. Entire churches have done that. They've given away their spiritual birthright and their heritage. Entire denominations have given away their heritage. They want a bloodless cross and a sexual ethic that's not quite so narrow. They want to act like the rest of the world and yet rest knowing they have a reservation in heaven. Listen carefully to me. Abdication of spiritual dedication is always a temptation. It's always a temptation to go along, to get along, all of that. But that's not for the people of God. In fact, abdication of any kind of dedication is always a temptation. Bertoldo de Giovanni is a name that even the most enthusiastic lover of art is unlikely to recognize. He was the pupil of Donatello, the greatest sculptor of his time, and he was the teacher of Michelangelo, the greatest sculptor of all time. Michelangelo was only 14 years old, just a teenager, when he came to Bertoldo, and it was already obvious that he was enormously gifted. Bertoldo was wise enough to realize that gifted people are often tempted to coast rather than grow, and therefore he kept trying to pressure his young prodigy to work seriously at his art. One day, he came into the studio to find Michelangelo toying with a piece of sculpture far beneath his abilities. Bertoldo grabbed a hammer, stomped across the room, and smashed the work of Michelangelo into hundreds of tiny pieces. Shouting this unforgettable message, he said, "Michelangelo, talent is cheap, dedication is costly." Or, as Phillips Brooks once said, "It does not take great men to do great things. It only takes consecrated men."